podcast. I'm your host, Amy Killingsworth, and this episode is pillar number 3, amnesty. So amnesty is really forgiveness. And so that begs the question, why didn't I call it forgiveness? Well, number one, these are all alliterations. So they all end in ty. So this one could be no different. But also, amnesty is a little bit more of a robust concept than forgiveness. And so to show that, I want to share a definition. So amnesty defined is to grant a general pardon to, it's a forgetting or overlooking of an offense or classes of offenses. Amnesty is forgiveness, and it's how we empty out the toxic tank and heal emotionally and become blameless. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, you might want to go back and check out the prior episodes because I'm beginning to unpack this process for you. Rise to Reign is a life healing strategy, and it's 7 principles or pillars applied to 7 categories. And so in the last several episodes, we identified the major problem that we face is blame. And so the way that you get out of blame is through forgiveness or offering amnesty. I also shared that your higher self, your true and authentic identity is that of the king or the queen, depending on if you're male or female. And so the sovereign, the king or the queen, is able to offer amnesty. So you can think of it in sort of like a political sense. It's the sovereign that offers amnesty, and it is your ticket to being blameless. And we covered in great detail the blessings and the benefits of being blameless and why you would want to do that. So go back and listen to those if you haven't. So amnesty is a discipline. Forgiveness is a discipline, and discipline is doing what doesn't come naturally. So I use the Rise to Reign process with my coaching clients and in my coaching programs. And inevitably, when we cover sovereignty, most people are like, yes, like I want to take radical responsibility. And yes, and when we cover identity, it's like, yes, I want to be the queen. And when we get to amnesty, that's when we start hitting a lot of resistance, because we start hearing things like, you don't know what they did to me. You don't know what I've been through. I can't just let this go. It's too painful. It's too impactful. And so this is really where we start to dig in and do the work. Up till now, we've kind of been building concepts, and we have been building a foundation of understanding. And this is where we really put it into practice. Amnesty, radical forgiveness, which is sort of my definition for amnesty, is the decision to let it go. Well, why would you want to do that? And more importantly, maybe, is how do you do that? So I want you to understand that it's not a result of having a feeling of, I forgive you. It's not a feeling like I'm over this, so I'm just going to let it go now. You have to make the decision to forgive even before you feel like forgiving. So it's not a product of wanting to forgive necessarily. It's a decision based on being willing so that you can get the benefits and so that you can get the blessing. Because holding on to offenses and holding on to hurts is really what's blocking your dreams and your desires. And so I want you to start seeing it in that framework. Because if you want something and you're feeling, we all do. We have some kind of desire, we have some kind of goal, and we want something to happen in our life. But if you feel blocked, if you feel frustrated, if you feel helpless, like you can't move forward, I guarantee you this is a core issue, is forgiveness. So it takes the prisoner and the slave girl or the princess or just the slave and the princess or the prince a while to catch on. Just because you still feel hurt doesn't mean that you've not forgiven. So it's a decision of your mind. And you make that decision because it's your way out of the prison of blame. So blame really is a prison. It enslaves you, and it absolutely causes you to be in this place of being stuck and being blocked. So when you forgive, you are making a decision to unblock yourself. You're making a decision for yourself. You're making a decision for your dreams and your goals, because forgiveness is not about the other person. It's not for the other person. It actually doesn't even have anything to do with the other person. Forgiveness is enlightened self-interest, because you want to do the inner work and you want to get past what is blocking you, what is holding you back, and onto your purpose. So I believe that every single one of us is created intentionally, on purpose, for a purpose. And when we're not pursuing that, when we're not active in that, when we're not operating in that purpose, or maybe not operating in it fully, we have a sense of dissatisfaction. We have a sense of restlessness. Sometimes we have a sense of anxiety or depression, because we're not where we fit. We're not in the place that we're supposed to be in, doing the thing we're supposed to be doing. And most of us have this like driving desire to find out, what's my purpose? Why am I here? That's kind of part of the human condition. And this issue of holding on to offenses will block you. It is the thing that keeps you blocked, and it is the thing that keeps you stuck. So a couple of episodes ago, we talked about the benefits of being blameless. Well, in order to be blameless, you have to forgive. Forgiveness is how you become blameless, because it is a decision to let go of blame and to not engage in blame. And again, it's a discipline, and discipline is doing what doesn't come naturally. You know, if you want to start working out and get stronger, it's hard at first, right? If you want to make a change in your life, or change how you show up, or make anything better, you're going to go through resistance. And forgiveness is no different, but you have to make a decision based on the fact that you want the reward, you want the benefit, you want the result of having forgiven. And remember, it's not about the other person. It's about you. It's about what's going on inside of you, and clearing the channel so that you can have all of the goodness that you want and that you really desire come rushing into your life. So the other thing is that with where amnesty is concerned, holding on to offense and blaming others and projecting our shame is the major problem in relationships. And those are individual relationships, inside families, it's in your neighborhood, in your community, in your church, in your political party, or your city government, or just your city, or between tribes, or between races, or between religions or genders. All of the dissension and the division, and even to wars and genocide that we see, has to do with this idea of holding on to an offense, blaming others, and then projecting our shame away onto something or someone else. So there's a story in the Bible. It's actually a parable that Jesus told that I want to read, that illustrates this point better than I could possibly ever do it myself. So it's in Matthew chapter 18, and it's verses 23 through 35. And I'll just go ahead and read it for you. So starting in verse 23, therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. Now, right away, we see rise to reign language here. So we have the king, we've got the sovereign, and then we've got slaves. And we see the relationship is that the slaves owe the king. And so what does the king decide to do? Well, he began his accounting, and one of the slaves owed him 10,000 talents. And that they brought that slave in. But the slave couldn't pay, so his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and his children and everything that he possessed so that payment could be made. So the slave fell on his knees and begged the king, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will repay everything that I owe." And so the king's heart was moved with compassion, and he released him and forgave him and canceled all of his debt. So that same slave, same day, goes out and he found one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And he seized him and began choking him, demanding, "Pay me what you owe me." So his fellow slave fell on his knees and begged him earnestly, "Have patience with me, and I will repay you." But he is unwilling, and he went and had him thrown into prison until he paid back the debt. So this idea of unforgiveness, I want you to see this picture here, is pay me what you owe me. That is the feeling of blame. That is the feeling of offense. That is the feeling of unforgiveness, is pay me what you owe me. Pay me back what I lost. So you're wanting to receive recompense. You're wanting to receive, you want to be made whole. And let me tell you, there's nothing wrong with that desire. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that desire. The desire for justice, the desire for recompense, the desire to be restored is completely, totally natural, and there's nothing wrong with it. But the person that wronged you in your mind is not able to pay you back, generally. There's not, or maybe they don't want to, or maybe they don't care. Regardless, your happiness, your kingdom or queendom, your righteousness, peace, and joy cannot be contingent or cannot be dependent on the choices and the decisions of and the abilities of another. So this slave who can't get paid back by his slave friend has his slave friend thrown into prison until he can pay back the debt. So when his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were deeply grieved, and they went and reported to their master with clarity and in detail everything that had taken place. So when his master called him and said to him, "You wicked and contemptible slave, I forgave all of that great debt of yours because you begged me to. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave who owed you little by comparison, just as I had mercy on you?" And in his wrath, the master turned him over to the torturers until he paid all that he owed. My heavenly Father will do the same to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from the heart. So we see this idea of prison, that when you are not, when you're demanding repayment and you're refusing to forgive, there's prison involved and there's torture involved. And it's really, really true. I mean, if you are in emotional pain of any kind, forgiveness is necessary. If you are in any kind of emotional pain, you need forgiveness. You need to receive forgiveness, and you need to give forgiveness away. And that's the concept of amnesty. And what it is at its heart is enlightened self-interest. It is the way out of the prison. Remember, one of the identities is a prisoner. So when we rise to reign, we're rising up through those different identities. There's prisoner, there's slave, there's prince and princess, and then there's your true self, your original design, who you were really made to be, which is the king or the queen. And so when we rise up through that, we have to let go of what ties us down. That's the concept of rising, is that the forces pulling you up are greater than the forces holding you down. You have to throw off the weight. Imagine a hot air balloon, and it needs to rise up. Well, first you have to throw off the sandbags. Yes, you have to fire up the heat and fill the balloon, but you also have to throw off the sandbags. And this is what the process of forgiveness is. The process of amnesty is taking that weight and throwing it off so you can rise into your rightful place of influence and your purpose and your original design, and operate in the world and walk in the authority and the sovereignty as a sovereign person that you were created for. So amnesty waives the right to use what happened against another person or yourself. So when we don't forgive or don't forgive completely, we tend to reserve the right to hold it against somebody. We're going to hold that against them. And in our mind, we feel like that's punishing or somehow hurting the other person. But probably they don't even know you're mad a lot of the time. They don't even, or they've forgotten, or they didn't even know they hurt your feelings, and you're holding this big grudge and carrying around this thing and actually trading your birthright for the perverse pleasure of holding on to this stinking, rotten unforgiveness. It's also ceasing to use what happened as an excuse for why your dreams or goals didn't materialize. I have dealt with this personally, well, all of this in my own life. I've tried it both ways, and I can promise you forgiveness is definitely the way to go. But when I was graduating high school, I wanted to go to college and study drama and theater. And my dad wouldn't have it. He was a businessman, and he was convinced that I couldn't make a living as an actress. So he was trying to do the best that he could for me, and he loved me, and he was trying to take care of me. But he made me, or he forced me in a way, to study business. And I failed all of my business classes because that just was not what I was made out to be. So I struggled and changed my major a bunch of times. And then I finally kind of limped out of school after many years. I'm not going to tell you how many, but it was a lot. Out of school with a psychology degree, because I finally ended up going into my guidance counselor's office and being like, I have this many credits. Like, how can I just end the pain? Like, how do I get out of college? And it was because I wasn't studying something that I was passionate about. I was studying something that somebody else had a vision for me in. And for years, I'm talking about years and years and years and years, I blamed my dad for me not having my dream of becoming an actress because he exerted that influence. And it might have been right. It might have been wrong. That's not how I parent my children. But it's also not the reason why my dreams and goals didn't materialize, because I've had multiple opportunities to do something different as an adult. I was an adult then. I was 18 years old, and I could have told him, to go pound sand, and I'm going to do what I want to do. So that this idea of taking radical responsibility as a sovereign person and letting other people off the hook and stopping using them as an excuse. Because if I had taken that energy that I was using to blame him and be mad at him and actually put it into pursuing acting, I would have probably had a better result, is what I'm saying. So you get the idea. It releases also that person from any obligation to you. So we see that in the parable of the servants, is that it's a trying to get paid back. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be paid back or made whole. But the idea here is to look to God to restore you. And He will. He absolutely, when you forgive from your heart, God will get you back what you lost and then some. He gets it back to you with interest. And it might not come through that person, but it will come back to you with interest when you follow the process. These are precepts and laws that are set forth in the universe, and they work. And if you violate them, they work against you. But if you work with them, they work for you. So the law of forgiveness states that if you forgive from your heart, you will be restored, you will be made whole, but you have to learn to trust God to do that for you. So it also releases you to be successful, happy, and free. And it's really the key, again, to all of your heart's desires, because what it does is it removes the blocks. It removes a block. What you want is already there. But if you're not experiencing it, if it's not manifest in your life, there's a block. There's a block somewhere. And this is where the block is. This is such a critical pillar, because this is where the block is. When you feel blocked, when you feel stuck, forgiveness is the answer. Amnesty is the answer. So we forgive people. We forgive situations. We forgive institutions, like maybe the church or a school. We also need to forgive God. Now, I want to be super clear that I don't believe that God needs our forgiveness, because I believe God is perfect and incapable of wrongdoing. However, if we're blaming God for something, we need to forgive, because forgiveness is emotional hygiene for us, inside of us. It is emotional hygiene. And it has nothing to do with the other person or the other party. So we brush our teeth to clean our teeth. And forgiveness is the same idea. It's washing out, it's cleaning out the internal environment. If you feel heavy, if you feel sad, if you feel grief, forgiveness is the answer. This is how you clean out the toxic tank. It's how you release those wounds, and it's how you heal so that you can be and do everything that is in your heart to do. So God doesn't need our forgiveness, but sometimes we need to forgive God. Like, why did you let my loved one die? Or why did you let me be abused in that way? And we'll talk about in another episode, we'll talk about how and why stuff happens in our life, and a framework of looking at that. But for now, suffice it to say that if you're holding something against God, if you're blaming God for something, you need to forgive God, not because he needs forgiveness, but because you need to do your internal hygiene. Sometimes we need to forgive ourselves. And a lot of times we think that whereas we wouldn't treat this person that way, or we wouldn't talk this way about a person, but we feel just fine bullying ourselves, and we feel just fine carrying around resentment towards ourselves. We have no problem blaming ourselves. And blame is just as toxic, whether it's directed outward or whether it's directed inward. It might even be more toxic. So we need to forgive ourselves. We need to forgive memories sometimes. Like if you have traumatic memories, you can go through a process of just forgiving that memory as it comes up. And then we also need to forgive the past. Sometimes as just a category, we need to forgive the past. So forgiveness is something like anything else that you have to receive it before you can give it away. In the parable of the servant who wouldn't forgive, you'll notice that the first step was he received forgiveness from the king. And then he had it, but he refused to give it away. So that's the cycle, is that we receive forgiveness and we give it away. We receive forgiveness and then we give it away. Well, if you haven't received forgiveness, then you don't have it to give away. So you need forgiveness from above to be able to give it away to somebody else. It's a decision. Amnesty is a decision to let it go. And I'm not going to break out into the Elsa song, You're Welcome, but I love that song because I actually play it in my mind sometimes when I'm tempted to pick up an offense. I remember what it would cost me. You know, all the things that if you have a journal and you have a vision board, or you have written down a vision that you want to see happen in a relationship or in your finances or in your business or whatever it is, and you're like, okay, I have this goal and this dream and this vision in my hand. Well, you have to put that down to pick up an offense. You really do, because you can't hold both. There's not room in your hands for both. So your dreams, your goals, your plans, the things that you hold the most dear, that you want more than anything else, are in your hands only if offense is not. You have to put that down to pick up your calling, to pick up your promises, to pick up your purpose, to pick up the things that you want and that you hold most dear. So sometimes I get that vision and I'm like, oops, I picked up an offense, because I feel that negative charge and I'm like, oops, I picked that up. And then I'm like, hot potato, drop it. Let it go, because I want to pick back up my promises. I want to pick back up my dreams and my visions and what I really want to have happen. And I know from personal experience that when I'm carrying around offense, I can't hold the vision for my life. You can only have one. So is it worth it? Is that petty resentment that feels perversely good for a moment because you feel like you're punishing someone else, is it worth it to not have your dreams come true? So it's really important to know that Jesus said to forgive and not forget. He didn't say to forget, he said to forgive. I know that that's a statement a lot of people say is forgive and forget. Well, you can't forget. It's impossible because your subconscious mind records every single experience that you've ever had. And that's useful because you need to learn. My dad used to say, when people show you who they are, believe them. And it's really, really important to use wisdom and to use discernment on who you let have access to your life. Forgiveness is not it might be a get out of jail free card, but it's get out of jail and go away. Like, not get out of jail and come to my house and live in my house. So it's not restoration. Forgiveness or amnesty and restoration are two different things. Now, it might be the first step toward restoration, and that also can be a beautiful thing when forgiveness happens and relationships are restored. But there are necessary things for restoration. Restoration does require action on the other party's part. It requires repentance and it requires action. It requires participation. Forgiveness doesn't. You don't need anything at all from that other party. In fact, you are releasing them and completely letting them go and cutting the ties that are sucking the life out of you, really, when you forgive someone. So amnesty is not restoration. Be really, really clear about that. Amnesty is not the reestablishment of trust. When you forgive someone and they have betrayed you, they still, and if you're going to trust them again, they still need to go through a process to reestablish trust with you. And that's making a different decision over and over and over again. And sometimes that's warranted. And sometimes, like I said, they need a one-way ticket right out of your life. So amnesty does not take away the need for boundaries. I'm going to do an entire, probably series on boundaries because it's super, super, super important. But all a boundary is telling somebody about you. For example, I won't talk to you if you're going to raise your voice and say curse words at me. That's a boundary. When you are forgiving, it doesn't mean that you get rid of your boundaries. You can still act wisely based on someone's prior actions without holding a grudge. So you can forgive and maintain your boundaries. You don't have to let your boundaries, you shouldn't let your boundaries down to forgive, but you do let go of the grudge. You let go of the negative emotional charge. So I do want to mention this. There's a fine line between a boundary and a punishment. So what's the difference between a boundary and a punishment? Well, a boundary is what I just said. It's like telling about you. And a punishment is like the silent treatment. So in the example I used before is like, I won't talk to you if you're going to curse and yell and raise your voice. Well, a punishment is I'm not going to talk to you and leave you to wonder why I'm not talking to you. There's a fine line between the two. And the difference is what's in your heart. Are you trying to hurt that person? Are you trying to get that person to feel bad for how they hurt you? Or are you communicating a need or a limit that you have? That's really, really, really important. So how do I know if I need to forgive? Well, when you feel a negative emotional charge around a person or thoughts of a situation, you know you have an active wound and not a scar. So it's possible to get to a place, even with great, great trauma, and even with great, great betrayal and horrible pain and suffering, it is possible to get to a place where you think back about that situation or that person or that happening or that institution or whatever it is. You think back about it and you remember it, but there's no negative emotional charge. When you feel the negative emotional charge is when you know that you have more forgiveness work to do. And amnesty is really a process. It is not a one-time thing. Because how many of you know, like if you go through a really serious betrayal, you can be like, okay, I forgive that person or I forgive that situation. And then, 2 days later, you're like, you're thinking about it and your blood is boiling. And it's like, it's okay. It's just another layer in the process. It doesn't mean that the forgiveness didn't work or didn't take. It just means that there's more forgiveness to do. So I'm going to share with you something that I call the forgiveness framework. The forgiveness framework basically is just, it's really a prayer. And it's just kind of a structured way of praying. So the first step, there's 3 steps in the forgiveness framework. The first step is to acknowledge the true feeling. So to do this, you need to really search your heart and search your body for what it is that you're actually feeling. Because you need to really confess that. You need to acknowledge what you're really feeling. And a lot of times, anger is like a smokescreen for fear or sadness. And what you want to do is you want to get down into the root feeling instead of just being like, I'm so mad. Okay, well, just sit with that and explore it for a moment and see what's behind that anger. I recently was working through some forgiveness in a situation, and I was feeling a lot of anger. And so I knew, like, okay, I need to go through forgiveness with this situation again. So I was like, okay, I feel angry. I sat with that for a minute. I was like, is that all there is? Is that all that I feel? And pretty soon I was like, no, I feel afraid. I feel afraid that I deserve this. I feel afraid that I'm always going to be dealing with the effects of this issue. I feel afraid that I'm not worthy of something better than this. And so all of this came out. And this wasn't the first time that I was doing forgiveness work around this situation. And all of this started coming out. And so I was able to you can journal it. You can speak it out, but you want to acknowledge the feeling. So I feel hurt. I feel sad. I feel grief. I feel betrayed. I feel angry. I feel afraid. Whatever it is, I acknowledge that I feel this. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is when you express your willingness. So remember, amnesty and forgiveness is based on a willingness. It isn't based on desire. It's based on a willingness to do this in faith, to trust that I need to let this go for my own self-interest. It's just a willingness to do what you're supposed to do in order to heal, what you need to do in order to heal, not necessarily what you feel like doing or want to do. So step number 2 is step number 1 is I feel sad, but I'm willing not to. I'm willing to forgive. So I feel sad, but I'm willing not to feel sad, and I'm willing to forgive. And then step number 3 is this is the really, really powerful part, is where you ask for heaven's perspective. You ask the Holy Spirit to actually show you this a different way, to actually give you heaven's perspective on this person, on this issue. Show me this from a healed perspective. Show me this from heaven's perspective. Show me this through your eyes. Show me this person. Show me the situation. And then you just sit and wait and see what the Spirit reveals to you. And it's really, really, really powerful, because a lot of times what I'll be shown when I make that request is I'll be shown the vision for my future. And it helps me take my eyes off the hurt and the pain that I experienced and onto what I'm going to be able to receive and experience after forgiveness, and what is going to be restored to me. And when you make that mindset shift, you automatically feel better, because you've released those feelings. You've acknowledged them. In essence, you've released them. And then you've asked for the healed perspective. So the forgiveness framework is acknowledgement, and then willingness, and then the releasing and the asking for heaven's perspective. And then there's a 4th step that is really powerful as well, is I usually just take that anger, that hurt, or whatever it was that I acknowledged, and I just give it over to Jesus. And I really just, in my vision, in my mind, I picture myself picking it up, whatever, like a burden, whatever it looks like, whatever it feels like. Sometimes it's gooey, and sometimes it's heavy, and sometimes it's dark, and I don't want it anymore. So I picture myself handing it to him, and him taking it inside of himself and transmuting it into nothing, because it's really what he came to do. And that's what he wants to do for you too. So that's the forgiveness framework. And I promise you that this is worth it. It isn't easy. It's very simple, but it's not easy, like many things in life that are super powerful. But this is very, very, very powerful. And it is the process by which we become blameless. It's the process of how we get out of the prison of blame, is being willing to forgive every little thing that upsets us. So remember, the kingdom or the queendom is righteousness, peace, and joy. So what do you forgive? Everything that's not that. So when something brushes up against your righteousness, your peace, and your joy, get rid of it. And you get rid of it through the process of forgiveness. Acknowledge, willing, and become willing, and then release it. All right, my friends, that's it for this episode of the Rise to Reign podcast. Remember that God wants you healed so you can wholeheartedly live your purpose and love your life. I'll see you next time.